You know, I always feel at these things, we want a moment of silence for the ones who are gone. But what I really feel from this is that I want a moment of silence for those of us who are left behind. You know what we're getting into and have a purpose. And it's hard to live without that purpose and without the companions that you have in that adventure. And did you see this coming?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I did. I mean, and Brent and I had many conversations about it, about the what ifs if something were to happen, and and this film is honoring those conversations of making promises to each other that you would keep filming and not leave the other person behind. And when I got the phone call from Juan, there was the shock, but there was also like a calmness of an acceptance from the very beginning that that this made a lot of sense, that this is how Brent would end.
Yeah, and you can see in the way he filmed things that there was this his ability and his instinct to sustain the shot past the moment of grief, of high emotion, that even in the landscapes, the thing that, a war story ends, but war does not. The house is gone, but the old man lives on. And when you guys worked together, did you both shoot, or were you doing sound? So you both did sound and shoot at the same time?
Yeah, we did everything, interchangeably. And a lot of times I would have to, even going back and looking through this footage, it would remind me of who shot what. Because if I go back and watch one of our films, it's hard to know who was filming in each particular moment.
Yeah. You work with Dart, yes, right? I'm sorry. I'm feeling wildly ill-prepared. This man is not here. And how is it for you to watch this movie now?
I don't watch it anymore. I choose not to do that. I think we did it many times. But I had in one of our screenings, maybe a couple months back, I thought I was prepared, and I started panting and sweating, and I had to step out of the theater, especially because those first 5 minutes just triggers flashbacks to that day.
Yeah, and how are you working with that now?
My experience with trauma is just comes in ebbs, and sometimes you have good days, you have bad days.
Yeah.
And it's been sort of interesting to see the different treatments I've done and therapies I've done, and some work and some done. So it's also coping with that. I think now is finding a purpose.
Yeah.
For a while there was a lot of survival guilt, and what I could, the things that we could have done differently that day, or as a friend if I was a bad friend because I left them behind. And a year later, we interviewed the driver. I did the same path, and we walked the same route, and it brought a lot of clarity.
Yeah.
It also brought a lot of closure to the family, because there were just things that I didn't know. And it was interesting to have that conversation with him, what he remembered, and the things that he remembered and the things that I remember.
Yeah.
And that's sort of given some more purpose, and I think now for me is just keep working. I think that's...
Yeah.
That's
and what are you working on now?
We are now shooting a second season for PBS.
On what?
PBS. As a second season. It's called Southern Storytellers, so we're in the second season of that. I freelance for the New York Times, and I teach. So
where are you teaching?
I teach photojournalism and intro to multimedia at Rutgers.
Great.
Yes.
At Rutgers?
At Rutgers, yes.
Wonderful.
Yes.
That's great. That must make it being able to take something and turn it into someone else's knowledge must be great.
It is, because I had great professors like Bruce was my professor at Columbia, and particularly because I'm grateful to all the mentors I had in my life. One
Right.
of them being Brent, and now Craig. Brent really took a liking to me and brought me under his wing, and we just worked together, and that was a very special time for me.
You know, it's funny. There's one of the Afghans I got to know well, General Sayar. He used to always say, "War will do one of three things to you." I can't do it in the Dari, I'm sorry. It will make you dead, it will make you crazy, or it will make you wise. And the process of turning what you've been through and what you've been through into wisdom it's a hard one. But I think the movie, in a way, was that one of the things that you were working towards when you guys were cutting it, is in a way finding that path through the trauma in it?
And it was a way of keeping Brent alive. I feel like as long as we were working on this footage, he was in the edit room with us. He was very present. 1 minute you're editing the Ukraine scene and he's gone, and then the next minute he's picking up a GoPro and crossing a river, and he's very much alive. So, I definitely healed through the making of this. Juan basically lived at my house, and would come back and forth and spend months in the edit room, and so it was definitely a way to heal. And it always bothered Brent that we didn't have our archives digitized, and we finally do, so he can rest in peace that everything is in one place. Every filmmaker can relate to that.
It's interesting. I taught a class today, and one of the big questions was, well, when these horrible things happen, don't you feel like you shouldn't be shooting? And it's like, no, because these people are giving their grief to the world. That it might have some impact. There's some hope, that it will have some, that it will come out, that it will mean something. And I felt that very much in the way you put it together. Normally these kinds, something like this, I get really agitated because it's like, but it really does bring forward this idea that war doesn't end. But in terms of how you've dealt with people coming back and this trauma, what do you feel about this movie, and in terms of how it's approaching that?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, I direct a project called the Global Center for Journalism and Trauma. A couple of things struck me about the film coming through in a really beautiful way, and separate even from my personal feelings about seeing my friend and colleague in a really vulnerable state in this film. First of all, it strikes me as that it's an extraordinary reply, a rebuke to the common cliche of the war correspondent as a kind of adrenaline-soaked head case action junkie. I've been a journalist my whole life. I'm not a war correspondent. I sometimes show up when the shooting is done and talk with people about that. And nearly all of them are people with a deep dedication that you saw in this film to bearing witness to not only to the violence that occurs, but to communities that would otherwise be invisible, to victims who otherwise would not be believed or who would be silenced. We saw that in Brent, we see it in Craig, we see it in Juan, and we see it in the way the story is told. Another thing that came through that I think is very important about this film, and a key part of trauma and the psychological challenges that journalists today face that are actually a little different from a generation ago. Journalism has become such a dangerous profession all over the world, including here in the United States, in part because threat and abuse and harassment and targeting of journalists is now validated from the highest levels of power in this country and in others. And also, I think, because in an era, it used to be that in conflict, crisis, difficult situations, all sides needed journalists to tell their story. Journalists enjoyed, in many places, a certain degree of protection and a little bit of privilege. that has changed, and it's changed in part because in an era of social media, of YouTube, of everything else, people who have too much power and want to abuse it don't need journalists anymore. They, the political powers, mafias, narcos, oligarchs can project their version of reality over the heads of professional journalists. In some ways, though, that makes the value, the essential role of the journalist in conflict and crisis even more important than it's ever been. But for the abusers, for the bad guys, for the people who targeted Brent and his colleagues that day, the value of a journalist is as a corpse to communicate terror.
Yeah.
Right? So we're living in an age in which journalists, including local reporters, covering school boards, covering city councils here in the United States, are dealing with a degree of targeting, of threat, that is new, especially for domestic journalists, but is also a little different from what conflict correspondents in years past faced.
Yeah. I wonder if there's any questions from the audience.
Thank you so much for an incredibly soulful film. To me, the best part of the film was the man talking about how soulfully, or how from the heart, the camera was held. And I feel like we, because we're among colleagues, we go to places and interview people and bring the stories back, and the people invest so much hope in us to tell the story, and that the telling of the story will change things for them. And I was just wondering what you do with that when you feel, and you too, Juan, when you feel impotent to make changes, because we're storytellers. And I felt that so deeply at that moment in the film.
It is really difficult. There's only so much you can do, and there's particular places that I felt that more than other places. Haiti was one place where the enormity of that, that was a particular place that I felt that over and over again with trying to deal with reporting in Haiti. And I do think, it's terrible that I've lost my brother, but it was really a blessing to be able to go back and revisit these places that we had filmed and look for all these different moments and then put them all together in one tribute to Brent and to other journalists. You do your best and you try to be sincere to everybody that you film and take that very seriously and hope that you can have some sort of impact. And I do think that's why it's so much more important now with journalists being under attack, and not just physically being under attack, but our voices being silenced even at home, that we can't get our stories out, that if it's anything slightly controversial, it's not going to hit the air and nobody will touch it.
A couple of things that come to mind. I've obviously have felt that frustration in many of the stories that I've done. Early on, I learned that not to overpromise and to be very sincere to my subjects and the people I work with. I actually don't like that word subject. I think they're collaborators, and so I when they're invested in their story, I know that I am trying to echo their voice. At times that's worked out well. I've been able to help some of my subjects. In other situations, you're just frustrated because you can't save a country, you can't save hundreds of people, refugees. But I think the one thing that I'm always mindful of, something that happened to me. I did a story about child soldiers. For 3 years, I followed a group of child soldiers. It was the front cover of the New York Times, and then the government punished them, took away their aid, and I wasn't prepared for that. So that was a moment of humility, but also of understanding that we can cause harm, and we have to really know what we're doing. Not only harm to ourselves, because I know the conversation is about protecting ourselves, but how do we protect our community? And what I face right now is, how do I cover my community, my Latino community right now? Because my mother was an immigrant. I'm a first-generation migrant, and so how do I do that without harming them, especially what is happening now? So I just want to acknowledge a little bit of that. But you pick your battles, and you hope you can add to the conversation, and if you can help them along the way, that's a plus for me these days.
Do you have people contacting either of you who you knew long ago from movies, contacting you for help ever?
Yeah, I mean, just 2 days ago, Jeff Newton, who Brent and I have worked with in a lot of places, contacted me about, a camera person and fixer that we've worked with forever who's trying to avoid serving with Russia right now. So we were trying to help him get to France so that he doesn't get enlisted, and this is somebody that worked with us in many places. So yeah, that happens often.
You got to pick them carefully because they'll be with you for the rest of your lives, either in your heart or in your email.
That Brent's military procession style funeral was all Arkansas National Guard soldiers that we were with in Iraq. That happened spontaneously. They were so moved when he was killed that's what I landed to when I got back from Ukraine.
Yeah, and they know how to mourn. That killed me.
The young man in the very beginning of the film that was crossing the river, do we know anything about his future?
No, that piece was so difficult because, they didn't have any sort of cell phones on them. We would give them our information and tell them to please stay in touch, and we never heard from most of those teenagers again, unfortunately.
One of the things about documentary and about journalism is that you never know when you're working on it. Which is the image, which is the film, which is the story that is going to suddenly change public perception. And in fact, usually it's not. Usually it's an accumulation of work over many years. Sometimes it turns out we're reporting for the future. Yeah. We're making our films for the future. Sometimes it feels futile, and yet we're learning how to do it. And we are still, always, every time. Juan, I loved how you described your engagement with your protagonists. Sometimes we are simply bearing witness for people who would otherwise be unheard and invisible. And in psychological terms even, that's of profound importance to them. The nature of trauma is to isolate people. The nature of abuses of power is to make people blame themselves or turn silent. And this film and you two refuse to be silent. Brent refused to be silent.
Thank you.
I think I have to end it here, but thank you so much for such an act of love and courage.